Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Glendale Water and Power Commission for Monday, October 1st, 2012. Item 1, roll call, please.
Commissioner Jimian?
Present.
Commissioner Dentler?
Present.
Commissioner Yao?
Present.
President Armenian? Commissioner Chan?
I'll start moving us through today's agenda so we can stay on track, and then I'll hand the gavel back over to the President, President Armenian. I suspect he'll come in a few moments late. So let's get going with item 2, please. Consent items. We just have approval of the minutes.
2A, approval of the August 6, 2012 meeting minutes.
Thank you. Did everyone have an opportunity to look at the minutes, and are there any changes, corrections, or comments?
I don't have any changes or corrections.
Should we defer this until we, this item until we, the other two members?
Why don't we do that? Yeah.
They may have comments.
Sure. Thank you for that suggestion. We'll defer approval of the minutes until later in the meeting. Thank you. If you could help remind me if I'm still chairing at that point. Thank you. Item 3, reports information.
3A, GWP budget presentation approved by City Council. Steve Zern.
President Pro Tem Dentler, members of the Commission, at our last meeting, a couple of issues arose regarding some of our current budgeted funds, or I should say lack thereof, for some of our projects. I think specifically we talked about the modernization or the smart grid project, and there was a little sense of surprise on the part of the Commission that we had zeroed that budget out for the year. And my reaction to that was it was part of the overall budget plan. Essentially all the capital, with very few exceptions, had been zeroed out as a result of the financial condition of the utility at this time. With that said, I thought it might be a good idea to bring that budget presentation back, go back over it again so that everybody was clear. So the presentation made to this Commission on May 7th, which was identical to the presentation made to the Council later that month, is what we've in essence brought back for you this afternoon. So let me go through that, and I will also be relying on Mr. Boeg and Mr. Linz on certain portions of this, and it just depends on how far into this you would like to go. Obviously, some of the things that we talk about at the back of the presentation with regards to rates and proceeding with some of the rate increases is somewhat of a moot point at this time, at least deferred off until next year when we bring the subject back up for discussion.
Mr. Stern, can I just interrupt you a moment? I just want the record to reflect, the minutes to reflect that the President just came in, and before we get any further in the agenda, since we just started, I'll turn the gavel over to the President. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're on 3A.
Okay. So with that, let me dive into this, and we'll go to the next slide, please, Gloria. You won't be able to rely on me for any assistance because I would probably shut the entire room down. There we go. Thank you. So the CIP working definitions that we developed for the beginning of the year were operational definition of critical, which essentially is to meet safety requirements, meet regulatory requirements, and maintain our ability to provide water, electricity, and billing, the basic essentials of our operation. And there's a legal obligation to serve that we also were beholden to. But essentially, we came in with a zero-based budget. We also wanted to talk about prudent utility practice to maintain the system reliability, and we have a lot of regulatory bodies and regulations that we're required to abide by, so that all had to be factored into it. And then finally, liability and consequences that would serve us. So we have 4 divisions within the utility: electric delivery, power supply, water, and customer and support services. And then with our CIP classifications, our capital improvement project classifications, we have critical and non-deferrable, those that we felt had to be done for some of those reasons that I just went through, critical, deferrable, and then prudent utility practice, but also deferrable. And this essentially breaks down, not in project specific, we have that going forward, and we can talk about those individually. But breaking it into those categories that I talked about, with the one addition of singling out the smart grid, on the advanced metering, and our whole modernization program. So you see electrical delivery, and that's the customer reimbursed non-deferred. This is really the only one that we had in the electric operation that wasn't deferred. And what this is when a customer comes to us and requests service for new construction or tenant improvements that greatly increase the size or the change of use of a particular facility, and they pay us to do work for them in putting in transformers and other electrical service components. So that is a straight pass-through. The customer comes in, we give them an estimate, they give us a check, and we go out and do the work. So we were obviously going to continue to maintain doing that, as it didn't have an impact on our budget, but it did have a lot of impact on customer service and delivery, and we wanted to make sure that we kept that. In the electric operation, the remainder of it, to the tune of about almost $19 million, was critical, deferred, and again, prudent utility practice, but deferrable. So the total electric is there, as you can see in the far right column, $22 million. Power supply, and this is primarily the power plant operation. We had no non-deferrable work, but we had almost a little over $9 million of deferrable. We did have a critical non-deferred component there with one aspect of the power plant. The remainder of it, the bulk of that $9.2 million was deferred as well. With the smart grid, we had a very small portion that we maintained. This was primarily software. Again, in this case, Mr. Keenan can give you some details on that. But it was mainly to get us through this initial phase, not the full initial phase, but get us into our billing cycle and allow us to begin to use the billing mechanism of the program. And then the remaining was also deferred. And then on the water side, we had one critical non-deferred project. This was a water main upgrade in the Adams Hill neighborhood. It was the only true project that we kept on the books, $3.3 million. The rest of the water operations projects, a little over $8 million, was deferred. And then our customer support services, both in IT and with facilities, we had some minor projects that we have put on the deferred list as well. So you can see, outside of the customer reimbursed, our critical non-deferred number was $5.1 million out of a total of, we don't have the total down there, but I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $52 million. So you can see the great majority of our capital program was deferred for this year. Thus, you'll hear the term, we have a zero capital project budget for this year.
I
Yes, sir.
assume you'll get into this a little bit later, but have you done a risk assessment in terms of what sort of additional risk that puts on the utility in different areas?
Well, that was, Mr. President, that was part of what all of the assistant general managers and their key staff went through as they put together this list. And so there's a sense that while there may be some level of risk, and I'll defer to both Steve and Ramon as they go through the individual projects to talk about those, because that's where we're headed next. You'll see here as we begin to talk about, here's the electric delivery and here's the deferred projects, and they can talk a little bit about that. So with that, I will ask, this looks like Ramon, come up and talk about the individual projects to the extent that you'd like us to. Obviously, if you want us to move faster through some of these, if they're self-explanatory, please just cut us off.
Can I just ask, back up to just a organizational question for a minute, so it'll help me follow the presentations better. Thank you. The four divisions that were referenced on the first slide,
Right there.
or slide 3, I was struggling to match them up with the organizational chart that was later in our packet, so it would help me understand the presentations if I could just follow. When you say the four divisions, then you turn to the organizational chart how do those match up? Like electric delivery is,
Electric delivery and water falls under Mr. Abweg as the Chief Assistant General Manager, and you'll see it. On that org chart I gave you, I hope there was highlighted boxes. The highlighted boxes indicate the new assignments to the General Manager, the assignments that were dispersed among the existing AGMs with the retirement of the other two AGMs. So power supply remains with Mr. Linz, and customer service and customer and support services, and let me go back. Included under power supply will be the business transformation and modernization efforts. So everything, smart grid, smart meter, that all now is under Mr. Linz as well. And then the customer and support services is Ms. Valle, who's also here. And she was essentially the administrator of that operation. It reported to Mr. Basson as the AGM. It now reports directly to me.
and so, thank you. And then where slide 3 references water as one of the 4 divisions, that was at the time you presented to City Council, but now water is now folded into electric and water services? It's no longer a division?
It still is a division. It just reports to a single Chief Assistant General Manager. So we've separated water. We haven't commingled it with electric in that manner. It remains separate for all of its operations. It just now, instead of reporting to a single AGM water, reports to the Chief AGM electric and water.
Thank you.
So with that, let me jump ahead, Mr. Boeg, and let you go through.
Good afternoon, President Armenian, members of the Commission. Ramona Boeg, I guess now water and electric AGM. As you can see on this list, these are the ones that we consider are the ones that we cannot defer. And mainly, if I might point out, up to the secondary services, these are the things that we need to keep the meters running, to keep the meters flowing. These are the things that we need in order to get a customer in service. We need transformers, we need meters, and we need to connect them either to the primary or the secondary services. The master fiber optic project, this is customer paid also. These are the ones that we provide dark services to customers. This is when they request to interconnect. And when they do that, we do charge them for interconnection for the use of our dark fiber. Basically, it's a fiber lease. Then GIS is the Geographic Information System. That's a contract that we already have in place that we need to continue funding until we can complete our GIS. So these are the ones that we decided we couldn't defer. Now, these are the ones that we consider are critical, but you mentioned about risk assessment. We assess what the risks are, and basically these are the things we need to keep our eyes on things, and whether or not we need to come back to council or through Mr. Sir and say, yeah, we agree to defer this. However, there are certain things happening that we can no longer defer it. We need to figure out how we need to fund this. If you recall, we had a plan. I believe we submitted to a plan on how to upgrade the Grandview substation, and part of that is because of all the development that's happening in the San Fernando area. And basically, we're keeping a close eye on that and whether or not the projects are going through. If they do go through, we need to work on these projects. But associated with that are these 3 major projects that affect the different connections. This is a substation itself. Actually, this is just for the work that needs to be done for 1 year for 1213. And then we also have to do improvements on the transmission as well as the distribution side. We have a program called deteriorated vault replacements. These are the underground vaults that are old that we're continuing to try to replace. 1,081,000 represents only 2 vaults per year. The refusing, again, if I'm getting into too much details, let me know. Refusing is when we look at all our distribution system, make sure that when we do have a problem, we try to isolate where the problems are. And I think you're seeing the benefits of that, because you're not seeing a lot of major outages, but we do have small outages. The poles, we need to continue replacing those. And just these are continuous, just buying the tools and equipment that we need to keep our day-to-day operations. So there's a total of about $13 million that we say that could be critical, can be deferred, we need to keep an eye on. And then these are the prudent utility practices. These are the programs that we'd like to do and want to complete in the next X years. We project that At the time when we thought we had the money, we thought by 2027 is when we needed all of these things completed. We're only projecting the cost for 1 year, but this is a major budget item. We're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars, but this is just for 1 year.
So this, if you can go back, so these are all deferred indefinitely, or you have a time frame, because you said X amount of time?
It's not indefinitely, but it'll be deferred until we can start funding it. The goal that we want to do with the potential rate increases, if we could have that as well as bonding, is be able to do the critical projects, and then the prudent utility practice that's been deferred will become a pay-as-you-go type project.
So I'm trying to also understand, are you basing these decisions at this point, are we following a principle of run to failure, or are we doing preventive work?
Well, we are still doing preventive work, and one thing I can guarantee you that I've guaranteed Mr. Cern is for as long as I'm here, we will not run this place to the ground. We're doing what we can. We're not going to be just a maintenance organization. We continue to do what we need to do with the restrictions that we have. So we're trying to be prudent. So if we have a cable that fails, we still do the same thing, and we try to fund it, and we will replace that cable. We won't put back a cable that's bad and wait for it to fail again. Okay.
And Mr. President, may I add, my expectation is this gets a restart next fiscal year. That's my hope. That's what I'm shooting for.
What do you mean by restart?
That means that we refund these projects and get them going again, and that obviously requires a revenue program, including both rates and bonds. But that's my hope, and that's what I'm shooting for. So that this is a single year, hopefully an anomaly, that we don't have to do this again, and that we can rejuvenate the CIP program to these levels next fiscal year.
But that's contingent upon, as you stated, rate increase and bonding.
That's correct.
A quick question about the dollars in this chart on slide 7. So since what we're looking at is a 1 fiscal year amount for each of these deferred items, and that these were all projects that we had hoped previously to complete by 2027, and now we're not going to be spending these dollars listed as part of our fiscal year 2012-13. So won't there be, aren't we loading the future years with higher costs for these same projects, and that won't this year's deferred maintenance just spill over and increase the total for the other years?
Not really. The reason I say that is we have a policy that we try to touch our system just once. If any of this fails, what we do, for example, for the conversion, let's say a 4 kV system fails. When we reinstall them, we have to do them anyway. The majority of the cost is the labor. The labor is already there. When we restore them with what we call the re-insulated. We already are doing the reconstruction that we call it. The insulations have already been redone. They're just not energized at the higher voltage, because the higher voltage would require a new substation, and that's the majority of the cost. So once we touch this once, re-insulate, reconstruct to the higher voltage, so ultimately when we get there. Same thing for the 34.5 to 69 kV. If they do fail, we have to do any repair work or maintenance, we go with what we call the higher voltage. So we are not, basically we're not loading up for the future. We're doing what we can to answer your question, so we're not running things to the ground. And we won't allow that to happen.
Hopefully, what we're doing is just adding a year on to the schedule, regrettably, but not because you're absolutely right, Ms. Dentler. Deferred maintenance can oftentimes be very costly, and we don't think we're going to be in that situation, at least not at this point. So maybe the worst that comes of it is we add an extra year to some of the multi-year programs.
But thanks for that explanation. So, but these items in slide 7 really are deferred labor costs. More than deferred maintenance. That would be the most correct way for for me as a layperson to understand it.
It's deferred improvement or deferred capital program. What we're doing with this, if you recall with our strategic plan, we're going to convert everything to 69 and 12 kV for transmission and distribution respectively. This is what gets us there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just ask that we, as things happen between now and whenever things are better, that we bring up some of these issues on the commission level so that we can help put a spotlight on it, because those are probably going to require special, some sort of special accommodation to get that sort of project done. If Ramon is indicating that, we're at a critical juncture where something could fail, I'm assuming we're going to know about it. And if that's a big cost item, we should probably discuss it on a commission level to help add to the urgency of it.
Okay.
And then the other thing I was going to point out is, as you said, Mr. Zern, a lot is dependent on rate increase and bonding. Since we have no guarantee that that will necessarily happen next year, we may need to look at what does the world look like if we still don't get it next year and this situation continues.
We absolutely will. In fact, we'll have that done as well. We don't like to think negatively, but certainly we'll need to have that information available, and we intend to do that work as well.
All right. The next items are for the power plant power supply. So, Steve Lins.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, Steve Lins, Chief Assistant General Manager, and just a little background on how we approached this. We kind of took a 5-year CIP plan, and we were given a task, and that task was, how can we get through the next year, or potentially get through the next fiscal year if we don't get a rate increase or a bond? And so, to the question about won't things pile up, what we've really done is take a 5-year CIP program and kind of push some things to the outer years. And so the first look that we took at this was what absolutely cannot wait 12 to 18 months, and that was the critical non-deferrable. And so what you see up here for power supply, the first critical non-deferrable, and this was contractual. It's a contract that we have with LADWP for DC line, and it's a contractual obligation. The work is planned, and so it's something that we just can't defer. The next set of projects are all related to the power plant and improvements on some of our older units. And so, for example, that first item there, the unit for boiler water wall retube, we think we can wait 12 to 18 months on that. And we have 3 units there. So in terms of assessing the risk, we looked at that in terms of an N-3. So we didn't replace the water wall tubes, but if 4 fails, we've got 3 and 5 there to back it up. And once again, we were able to make the risk assessment that we could get through 12 to 18 months. And then finally, these were just prudent utility practice items that we expect to get done within the next 5 years.
Can you explain for our audience what out of this, because they won't understand most of this terminology, what has to do with Grayson versus other sources that we have?
Well, on this list, everything except for the Unit 1011 new generation units is Grayson Power Plant. And just a reminder to the community, that plant ranges from units that were put in service in 1941 up until our newest unit was 03. So there's some very old equipment there, and we're keeping it running. And then the item there that's Unit 1011 new generation units, we are looking at options for repowering that entire plant. And
So that would imply retiring the old ones, right? The ones that you mentioned are from pretty far back.
Yes.
With newer.
And there's several potential scenarios. Some you could get rid of just the very oldest units and put in maybe one new unit. One scenario is get rid of everything except for the newest peaker and put in a couple of other units. So we're looking at various scenarios. We're talking to partners through SCAPA to see if there's interest in participating in that scenario. And Los Angeles and Burbank are interested, so we're looking at those options. And
So I assume as part of, Mr. Zern, as you look toward the next year and the future funding scenarios, part of that bonding has to do with that sort of decision in terms of retiring old units and whether or not we want to be in the generation business and building new units, that sort of thing.
Absolutely, and I think you noticed in my report was that's one of the very immediate challenges that we have to address and see what we want to do. And as Steve said, it ranges all the way from we're not in the generation business anymore, we'll purchase everything, to do we get into some multi-agency cooperative partnership and build something even bigger than what we have now, and every option in between. But absolutely.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that for the audience.
sure, the next slide, slide 11, deals with the smart grid project. And we had one item on here that absolutely could not be deferred, and that was some storage that we needed in order to get the system to bill. We call that go live. We're not quite there yet, but we do have this in the budget. We're putting that system in, and we're working on getting the smart grid system with all the meters actually billing on an automated basis.
So this particular project, again, critical non-deferred, meaning we're going forward with this because the whole smart grid system is dependent on this.
Yes. Then slide 12 and 13, once again, are projects that we anticipate we need to do in the next 5 years. And I can go through detail on that if you like. What are the highlights here? Cybersecurity assessment. Once again, all things that could be deferred 12 to 18 months and beyond. And then the third slide being items that could be deferred out into the 3 to 5 year.
So a question I do have in terms of how you made your assessment specifically on the cybersecurity, since we're now dealing with a whole lot more data off of the smart meters. Is there a minimum level of cybersecurity in place that you feel confident is enough? Because on the second slide you're saying prudent practice but deferred. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, there's a great deal of work has been done, and there's still work ongoing through Ed Frega and the city's IT department. So work's ongoing, but the work that was specifically related to the DOE project we felt was something that we could push out beyond that first 12 to 18 month period.
But some minimum level, not minimum, but important levels of cybersecurity are currently in place. And so we're confident that those can hold us for now until we have to do any further enhancements.
We're actually going to go forward with doing a reassessment of the entire security system, because I think, as you're all well aware, this can change dramatically. I think we just saw, we were just notified by Mr. Frega that there was a hacking incident into certain types of power suppliers. It happens to be a kind of software that we have. But we also have the recommended software backup for that. We don't have it installed yet, but we're now talking about pushing forward to install that. So I think just taking the reassessment of where we are and where we need to be right off the bat, and then looking at what we already have aboard and see what that's going to take to finish is important, and that's moving forward. I will tell you, when it comes to this whole modernization effort, we have sat back, even though technically outside of that one, the SAN, the storage, we had zeroed things out, but we've looked at any number of ways that we could continue to try to move it forward. For instance, we have the radio systems that go throughout the city that transmit the information. These are put on our power poles. Well, we had stopped installing those because they were installed by a contractor. Well, now that Ramon's crews have less of the CIP work to do, we've had them to start installing those radios so that we don't lose any traction on that particular issue. In fact, if we're able to move that along pretty steadily, combined with the SAN storage that Steve spoke about, I'd like to see us be able to get the billing system up and running by the end of this year, which would be a good accomplishment. And then we could start from there to start to give people back the information that we've talked that they would be getting. We would be utilizing our advanced metering systems to get that information and use the new billing system. So at least everything that we've talked about at this point, it looks very positive to do that. So anyway, outside of just looking at these CIP programs and going, okay, well, we're not going to have $5 million, so we're going to have to just wait. We've looked at every conceivable way where we didn't have to wait, where we could do things with in other ways, maybe using other pots of money, maybe using our labor, as I said, that had been freed up because of our CIP projects being deferred. So I think we're going to make some progress, maybe not at the same pace we had hoped to if we'd have had the full budget, but we are not going to lose as much ground as I think it initially appears when you say we're zeroing this out. We did request an extension of 1 year from the DOE on our grant. We were given that extension, so that helps us with a little bit of breathing room. But I think if we make a lot of progress this year with that limited budget, we're sitting in pretty good shape, and then we get the program back up and running and finish it off for that last $9 or $10 million that we need to invest for the original DOE grant. But as you all know, and as I've mentioned in some of my reporting, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. You saw Ramon's 4 kV to 12 kV conversion, which is essentially the modernization of the grid. So that effort continues into the future once we get past this, even the DOE grant. But again, staff has done a great job of putting their heads together, as is Mr. Fraga and IT, thinking a little bit outside the box of how we could continue to make progress, albeit a little slower than we had hoped, even with this zero-based budget.
I just want to make sure, though, and the reason is the cybersecurity thing really kind of raised the flag for me. It's a very quickly evolving type of area, right, where you may think you're completely protected today, and then tomorrow all of a sudden someone proves you wrong, and there are people out there who's make a living in their minds off of proving you wrong. So I just want to make sure we're not cutting corners thinking we're good when obviously the whole cybersecurity area, can change on you overnight by just one individual. So when I see cybersecurity and the words deferred next to each other, it concerns me.
And then we also have it on 2 slides, so the total, I'm so glad that Commissioner Chen asked for you to go through this with us. It would have been so good if we had understood, before. It was before you got there, so I'm not putting you on the hot seat, but for us to see this on the commission level, I think is really important, and I wish we had seen it before it went to council or simultaneously.
Well, you did, Ms. Dentler. I just apologize if it wasn't quite conveyed the way. This is exactly what they had been giving you, and I think I said to Mr. Armini, and I apologize for that.
Oh, no, I know. I wasn't asking for another apology. I'm just commenting that so it's good for the public to see it and for the public to see the commissioners asking about it. So what we have is 2 slides that add up to $700,000 for bird cybersecurity protections, one that's deemed critical and one set of protections that's deemed prudent utility practice. So that's $700,000 of cybersecurity protections, either prudent or critical, that our community is not going to be getting in fiscal year 2012. So my question is, so it's done, the budget package is done. So my question is, when this was presented to the city manager and the council, did council express concern about cybersecurity?
They did, and they expressed concern about the whole modernization program and the fact that we, based on the amount of money we've already invested, it didn't seem prudent, at least at this point, to stop it
Yeah, I know that part, but I'm asking about the cybersecurity.
From the security standpoint, as I said, I wouldn't exactly phrase it today as we're totally deferring that. Is what I was alluding to before, both what President Armenian mentioned, which was this is a really evolving situation with the whole hacking and the vulnerability of your system, which is why we're going to reassess it. We had an assessment done a while back. We're not resting on that. We're going to reassess it. And working with Mr. Fraga, he's got some things in place. There are some things we've already purchased, in fact, that are here that we now are going to get together and talk about. Is there any plausible way for us to begin to put those into place so that we aren't just letting this go for a year? So I can tell you this.
5 years.
In 5 years, it's an ongoing. I think from a 5-year perspective, you would look at it as we are continuing to keep pace with the world as it is and keep our cybersecurity situation current.
You wouldn't actually know that slide 12 consists of matters deferred for 5 years. That was part of the oral presentation, but actually that's a whopper of a list of important things deferred.
Right, and I think the sense is that, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, is the deferral is 1 year. It's a 5-year plan. So we would be, as I had stated earlier, my hope, and I'm being the eternal optimist, is that the worst case scenario is we just push everything back a year. And so in some cases, as I said, though, we're addressing that a little bit different way, getting creative and thinking outside the box. But I can tell all of you, Mr. Frega this is very high on his priority list, and he will not let us rest. And I think he makes a very valid point, so we continue to engage him in this particular issue and to make sure that we don't fall behind or become more vulnerable.
Yeah, and just to clarify, there still is O&M budget, and there's still several staff members in Ed's shop and in our shop that are looking at security. We're just not doing capital improvement projects. We're not adding hardware.
No, I understand
So-
that. But the slides say prudent and critical. So, it is what it is. The community needs to know.
Let me just do a clarification. We do meet the cybersecurity requirements that is required by NERC, and we have what's called the CIP standards, the critical infrastructure protection that we abide by. Everything that we've installed have met, if not meet or exceed the standards. What we're doing here in this program, there's a lot of monitoring tools that allows us to be more proactive. That's what we're looking at here as our new tools that's available out here for monitoring. But I want to rest assure everyone that the system that we have installed meet or exceed the current requirements by NERC and WEC in terms of cyber infrastructure. The ones that were budgeted here are things that we could do better, we could improve on. But in terms of the security, I assure everyone that we meet the requirements.
That's comforting to know, but at the same time, we're a pioneer in this area, and the space is relatively new for the industry. So, that comes with some responsibility if you're going to pioneer, to also pioneer the other side of the equation, which is, helping set industry standards or being participants in that discussion, not just for ourselves, but overall. So I appreciate, I think that says a lot, and people should know that when you're saying we're meeting NERC and SIP requirements, those are pretty stringent requirements. At the same time, I want us to stay ahead of that curve because of how new the technology is, and there are things that we probably will yet to discover as more of the industry implements the technology.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to the water. I'm just going to touch on the one that we felt are pretty critical. We have the Glorieta project where we're starting to do the chloramination. That's ongoing. We're almost wrapping that up. And then City Works is just basically our new asset management. And as Mr. Zern pointed out, Adams Hill is really the only true capital program that we have. Now, the Phase 6 or the Phase 3 of the chromium-6 treatment, we budgeted for it, but we're getting refunded for that. So we're just upfronting the money, but we have grant monies to pay us for that. And the rest of this are a lot of projects that we'd like to do. And as we come forward to you with our bond financing, most of these projects are identified again, or things that we would like to get done as soon as we get approved with our bond financing. Okay? That's all part of that. And then this is the information technology. That's yours.
So Glendale Water and Power has its own in-house IT group that has been focusing primarily on the billing system and the smart grid system. And all of these projects are projects that we have decided we can defer. It's a long list of hardware once again. This group is currently working on the Go Live project, just to getting the existing billing system up and billing on an automatic basis, and that work going to take them, through the end of this year and into next year. So these are, once again, a long list of servers. On slide 17, you've got $113,000 worth of servers. On slide 18,
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Just a point of, just to refresh everyone's memory. Are we currently billing off the smart meters, or we're not yet? Are we? In other words, are we still doing side by side, or
Doing side by side.
Okay. What does that mean?
We're testing some cycles as we go along, so we may have 2 cycles where we know that there's enough saturation of meters communicating in an area that we'll go ahead and bill through the system, but also at the same time do parallel reading.
Okay. And that's random, just based on
Right now,
data you're getting in?
it's based on need in the area where we're at. So if we know we have a high saturation of meters that are communicating, it makes for a good test to actually build through the system.
But all the meters are installed at this point, right?
Except for a handful of
The stragglers.
very hard to
Right.
get access issues, and a few meters that we need to go in the field and either mitigate or replace.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. So what do you mean, a saturation of communication? Aren't almost all of ours communicating?
Well, there's some additional radios that we need to install in some areas. So we may have a meter route, for example, that has 500 meters in that route, and there may be, for some reason, 25 meters in that area that are not communicating on a regular basis. So if you pull that route to read, you're going to have 25 additional exceptions that you're then going to have to send somebody out to read manually.
So some of the reasons why some meters aren't communicating, what?
Well, it could be we need an additional communication radio or another meter for it to talk to get back to us. It could be that the meter, for some reason, didn't receive the upgraded firmware, and so we have to go out and mitigate that meter. Those are the primary reasons.
Thanks.
They're all collecting the information and storing it. It's just a matter of making sure the communication is happening.
And actually, one of the projects that still is in the budget this year is adding 27 radios to make that mesh work better so that we don't have the technical issues that Tammy's talking about. So the final page for customer services support on IT is all software enhancements. These would be great to push things forward and improve what we're doing, but we felt that those could be held off as well. The next set of projects for customer service support is projects related to facilities. Once again, I'd like to emphasize what Ramon said, which is that we meet all of our NERC-WEC standards for security. These are all improvements that will go above and beyond those standards. It includes, things to facilities like exterior painting, wall coverings. If any of you have been over to the Perkins building, you can see that 20-year-old wall coverings are starting to break down. But once again, we didn't think these were critical and that these could be put off. So they're actually in the facilities portion of the customer service and support budget, everything was deferred.
And I know we've been talking about the security standards on the electric side, but what about, since we're deferring, for example, security improvement on water facilities, how are we addressing those in terms of making sure we're meeting certain standards?
Yeah, most of the facilities, they don't have the videos yet. Those are the things we need to do. But all our water facilities have the proper security measures that's required by, I believe, the Department of Homeland Security. We had taken a look at the critical facilities, and those were completed. What we don't have currently in some of them, we don't have some of the videos up, but in most cases they are.
Thank you.
That takes us to slide 22, unless you have other questions specific, just on, once again, to Steve for an overview of the current budgetary condition.
So based on the situation that we found ourselves in for this fiscal year, thank you, Steve, approximately $11 million gap in O&M for fiscal year 2012-2013 in the electric operation. We had experienced a loss of revenue of $35 million from peak revenue in fiscal year 09 and 10. Many reasons, not the least of which was cooler weather. Conservation efforts are picking up. There was an increase in total city allocations and internal service fund charges of $5 million. And these are things like ISD, fleet charges, those kind of things. In order for us to fill this gap, this is what at the time the staff had indicated would require the elimination of all 21 vacant positions, which essentially we've done, require a workforce reduction of approximately 85 more positions, and a zero-based capital budget, which we've just gone through with you. Now, since that time, we, as I'm sure you're aware, have completed at least the initial PARS retirement incentive program. So that was open to GMA and GCA members. At that time, the IBEW membership declined to participate. So we experienced in Glendale Water and Power approximately 35 retirements. Now, the goal for the city overall was no more than a 20% higher back, and I think we're just a shade under that. So we've, when you're looking at those additional 85 positions, we did get a fair amount through our retirements. Now, again, since that time, the IBEW has approached the city and our department about the possibility of participating in a PARS incentive program. The council will hear that tomorrow night. So there's a chance that there may be some additional reductions as a result of retirements. But nonetheless, we are going to need to begin to move towards that 85 number. So depending on the number of retirements we experience in this next phase, if it's all approved, we will still have to look at potential workforce reductions in the form of layoffs in the very near future. And again, that $11 million gap is significant. And when you're looking at an operation like this, or any operation in the city for that matter, your HR expenses are what is the bulk of your budget. 80-85% of what you do is in that salary and benefits range. So part of our, it's one thing to talk about cost containment. To get to cost containment, we have to do a little bit of hard work here. And it can be a little painful, but that's where we need to go in order to close that gap in our O&M budget for 2012-13. Could
not for today, but is it possible to get a more specific breakdown of this city allocation charges coming back, especially since last time we had addressed this issue was at $4 million, right?
It may have been, yes.
So,
yes.
So now it's $5 million. Is it possible to get a breakdown of that?
Yes.
Offline?
Yes.
Thank you.
We can do that. Water, we want to balance that O&M budget. As you know, the water division's a little different situation. We did get a rate increase in that. We are at this point pursuing the issuance of debt, issuing bonds for the capital portion of that. Although financial condition of the water company was such that it will take us a while to dig out of that, and it's likely that while at least at this time in 2012-13, it was being called a balanced O&M budget, I still feel that we have some cost reductions that need to take place in that operation as well. So we'll be looking very closely at that. A lot of where we focused, at least initially, has been the electric part of the operation, and to a certain extent some of the power plant as well. We'll need to take a closer look at our water operation. Even with that rate increase in the bond issuance, we need to do some reductions in that operation as well. At the time this was presented to you back in May, these were the cash balances. I can tell you they are different today, and what I plan to do is to get you some new ones on that so you can see what the up-to-date number is. But you can see the critical situation that we're facing in the water department. And as I said, that's not an easy number to dig out of in a short period of time. I think I had alluded to the fact the last time when I was talking to you all that this was not something we were going to be able to do overnight. It was going to take us a few years to get back to where we want to be. And there's a lot of hard work and a little bit of pain we're going to have to experience in order to get there. But I have every intention of moving us back into that direction. Again, you see the cash balance of $72 million, which looks good from here, but I think as you all saw when we showed you the rate presentations, the council approved fund balance limit or cash balance limit is $124 million. So we have fallen below that, and at the current rate, with us needing to close that gap and also back up that $21 million deficit. So with $21 million in the hole, we have to somehow find the O&M expenses to keep the operation running per year. We've drawn down on that cash even more, so it makes it all the more critical for us to begin to quickly start to bring our costs under control. And with that, I'll tell you, there is a certain point, and I'm not doing this with a bloody sword on this thing, because we need to kind of do it in increments to see where we're at once we've made some of the reductions we have. Because there'll be a point when we get to, and that'll be a point where we can't reduce anymore without affecting reliability, service, safety, and those things we just can't fudge on those at all. So finding that balance is something that's my job to do, and I'm working my way towards that. And then we'll have to reevaluate at that point where we stand and where we need to go.
On the water deficit side, we've instituted a water rate increase under the premise that will help address some of this issue. Can you tell us what amount of this $21 million, that kind of forecasted rate increase that we instituted, will address, and how much of an approximate shortfall you still forecast?
Mr. President, I see us with the current rate schedule as approved by the council, and assuming we were able to issue the bonds to do the capital work, which is essentially about a 3-year program, we probably climb out of this somewhere in 2016. So right towards the end of that multi-year rate increase is where we find ourselves beginning to pull even. We've built our cash reserves up a little bit. At that point, we can, and hopefully we had been, at least to some degree, we can begin to repay the electric department for some of the money they've loaned the water company to keep the operations moving. So when I say it won't happen overnight, that's kind of, that's exactly actually what I was referring to, is, you're looking at somewhere out in that 2016 area, 2017, when we begin to stabilize things and get back to positive balances.
I have a question. Can I? When you alluded to wanting to trim, or whatever your wording was, I know that you're being careful, and we don't have any jurisdiction over personnel matters, and I don't mean my question to get into areas that aren't within our purview. But you said that you saw some O&M budgetary areas for possible trimming or reductions on the water side, and that my comment is. $21 million hole that we're in on the water side isn't going to be meaningfully addressed by letting go a handful of people. So I assume when you say some cost reductions in O&M, you must have other things in mind besides individuals, but I know labor is our biggest cost. So I'm just looking at the organizational chart, which I really did appreciate getting in our packet. I think that was very useful for us today, so thank you for that. If I'm looking at on the water side, we already have some unfilled vacancies, and then you've made some administrative decisions at the top to consolidate water and electric under the new Chief Assistant General Manager. So I guess I'm wondering from your point of view about the water side of our operation, if we're looking at unfilled vacancies plus potential further layoffs, isn't there a $21 million deficit while we're waiting for some of the bond monies and the rate increases to help us out? I'm concerned, I'm sure you are, that we not reduce our staff capacity so much that then, once you begin to replenish the reserve, the revenue side, that we've had a brain drain. That's really a comment.
Yeah, that's Ms. Dentler was what I was alluding to when I said, there is a point when we've reached bottom on this, and that we don't want to go so far in as to begin to harm ourselves or harm our customers or our staffs. There is something to be said for, especially on the capital side of things, there may be a need for us, depending on what the time frame is, to look at higher backs later on as the situation improves.
After somebody's been out of their position for months?
Yeah, that's always an option, is to bring people back in the event that we see things begin to improve. But what I'd rather...
Hopefully the good ones will be off enjoying another career somewhere else in another state or area. So,
well, what I would rather do is right-size the organization now and be prepared for both current and future.
I know, of course.
$21 million, I mean, at least there is a silver lining to a certain extent there, and that's that we do have a rate increase in place. We do see ourselves climbing back, albeit over a period of several years. It looks like every indication is that the bond issuance is going forward, which will greatly enhance our capital program and allow us to charge off. Because I don't know if you're aware, but we're able to charge staff time for design and engineering off to the actual project. So that helps free up M&O money as well, where those salaries are all now residing because there isn't any capital projects to charge them off to. So by doing that, you can also see a direct impact on your salaries. But again, Ms. Dentler, you bring up a good point. It's just a matter of trying to be very methodical about this. I don't want to go too far too quick.
and we already have, and the whole time I've been on this commission, we've had unfilled vacancies on the water side. So I just, again, my comments aren't to make you defensive.
No,
I'm
not at all.
Apologize at all. I just think the community and the council need to understand that we went through the water hike process with a lot of political resistance, a lot of genuine concern expressed by council and by the community about why we needed those revenue side changes. And we heard a lot about our deferred pipes, our pipe maintenance, and I mean, I toured some of the waterside facilities, and I saw with my own eyes there's deferred work, and we have, once you get the dollars in to start repairing the pipes, you need good experienced people at the top to supervise the projects.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's my speech. Thank
Yeah,
you.
part of why I was also bringing that up is, you create this presumption with the public when you're doing this rate increase that the issues and the rationale that it is based on is that, okay, some of these critical things are going to be addressed. And if you get through a 4-year cycle, or I think it was over 4 years.
Correct.
And we're still where we are, you outlined 2016 as an approximate date where we might get back to being balanced. If we are not there and we are somehow going back to the public yet again, you will have exhausted, your confidence level with the public that, that you are running, taking that rate increase and solving the problem. Because then they'll think it's, you just come back to us to constantly, fill up the well, but it doesn't really seem to get applied to where we said we would. So that's I think the risk here. Not all because of anything. I want to be clear. Not because we're somehow misdirecting funds. It's just that the situation is evolving. Our financial situation is evolving, and so we need to be very careful. There is what I'm saying, with being good stewards of that rate increase money and making sure that we're addressing at least some of the issues that we said we would address if we were to get that increase. So that we're not coming right back saying, hey, we're still exactly where we were 4 years ago because somehow it...
And that's exactly what we don't want to do. And as I said many times when we took our show on the road for the electric rates, we're asking you to support us in the revenue enhancement at the same time. We're going to show you that we have a commitment on our side as well, whether that's cost reduction and cost containment, or directly addressing the issues that we have concerns with at this time, and I fully intend to do it. That's why at the end of 2016, we will have fulfilled the promise. It takes a little longer than we had hoped, but with everything going in the right direction, we'll have got back to positive balances.
Can I ask a couple of questions? I apologize for being late earlier, and I missed a big part of it. Thank you so much for presenting this detailed list of all of the deferrals and cuts. So I see in the last, the third last slide, there are three options, option A, B, and C.
I don't think we've gotten to that slide
Oh,
yet.
we have not yet. Okay. I just want to make sure that I kind of know what's going on. Did council approve one of these options?
No, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
As Ms. Chan, as you're aware, this is the slide I was referring to that's a bit outdated now.
Oh, okay.
This
I see.
is what the staff had presented to the council, to you and the council in May. Since that time, as you know, we've gone out with a rate proposal. It wasn't exactly this proposal, and that we came back to council and discussed, and we've deferred that till next year.
So this was the presentation that was made at council?
It was made
Okay.
to the commission and council. I didn't
I
change
see.
it at
I see.
all because I wanted to make sure you had a flavor for what we did then, and we would just verbally update it. In fact, anywhere on this that you're looking for an update, and maybe we come back and talk a little more about cybersecurity because that seems to be of interest.
Okay. And so if we assume it's zero base
Yes.
budget, no increase, then we are cutting the critical defer and the prudent utility practice defer, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
The only thing we kept was critical non-deferred, which is very few projects.
Critical non-defer, we're definitely keeping.
Critical
We're
non-deferred.
doing, right, we're moving forward with it, and customer reimbursed non-defer also.
Which is the majority of it on the electric side. We've got a storage on the power side and a pipe upgrade in Adams Hill on the water side.
Okay, so the decision is no increase.
At this time,
At
that's
this
right.
time.
We'll be back probably next spring to
Next spring.
talk about it again. We'll get all of our outreach effort up and running. What we're going to do in the meantime, because now that we have a little bit more time, is I'm asking staff to do a full review of the structure of our rates. Like I said, with that time, I think it's a good use of time to go through, look at our entire rate structure, see what our different categories are, make sure that we're all compliant with AB 26. Maybe there's some new categories we want to add. One of that's come up is the electric vehicle charge for that, because that's something we see becoming more and more popular in the future. So things like that. So we'll have a little bit more comprehensive review of the overall rate structure, and then we'll be ready to go out on the road again, and then touch base with the community, bring it back to the commission and then the council, and we sometime in late spring, early summer, we can move forward. That's on the electric side.
And did I hear correctly that most of the items under critical defer are items that can be looked at in about 3 or 4 years?
Actually, Ms. Chan, my hope is that we can look at them again
Sooner,
next year.
next year. Yeah, right away,
and that,
right. Okay.
That if we get the needed revenue enhancement in next fiscal year, we'll just simply replug these in. With, again, my comment was, in the worst case, we just push everything out a year and we can move on from there. Mr. Armenian brought up, and in case that doesn't happen, we'll also have a plan and the ramifications and impacts of what that would mean if we didn't.
Right, definitely. Yeah, I think that's very important. If we're moving forward with zero base rate, we're deferring it, well, next spring you mentioned. So that's like 6-8 months. So yeah, it would be very important to revisit these. There are quite a few items here that I think are very important and critical, including the cyber security one. So yeah, it would be good to revisit as soon as we can. And thanks again for providing this list.
You're very welcome.
Are there any other questions from the commission? We do have a speaker, and I do want to move us along because otherwise we won't get to some of the other critical items. No? Okay. Mr. Herbert Milano.
Good afternoon, Commission President, Armenian members of the Water and Power Commission and staff. My name is Herbert Molano. In the years that I've been coming here, I think it's maybe around 7 years or so, and every time I take a look at the capital improvement reports, oftentimes I see these reports being presented primarily by some type of valuation. I worked a lot in cost accounting, and to me, looking at a particular assessment of assets, I like to see generally the state of the infrastructure according to the remaining life years. And ideally, a concise form that allows you and the general public to get a year-to-year evaluation as to just what are the real conditions that are there. When you get an amount like $2 million needed or $13 million needed, it doesn't really give you a way to grasp and put your arms around the fact that there is a power generating facility that was built in 1947 that has a 27-year life. It has been upgraded 3 different times and is way beyond its expected life. That is a real, tangible, factual thing that you can look at, but you have no graphic of that. So you have power delivery, power generating assets that need to be upgraded, but as the years go by, you don't get a year-to-year evaluation in a picture form, in a graphic form, that tells you exactly what happens when you do not maintain those assets on a continual basis. If the issues are reliability and safety as being primary, I think that having a graphic way of representing those key assets in water and electricity so that we can really understand what's going on. In 2007, there was a fairly significant presentation made by Mr. Kavunas on all of the infrastructure repairs needed by the water department. There wasn't a single slide on the smart meter. And the $50 million bond, the amount required that led to the $50 million bond in 2008 was based on the dire requirements of that infrastructure that you incidentally saw personally. We saw all the pictures. And yet, we continue those transfers from the utility over to the general fund. Now let's take a look, for example, today on slide number 4. There is the critical defer for electrical. For electrical delivery is $13.7 million, and for power supply, $6.8. This is using the director's terminology here. You got $20.5 million of critical infrastructure repair that is being deferred. That's close to the, $21 million or so that we're transferring from the electrical utility to the general fund. And that has been the ongoing conversation that I've been trying to have with the City Council and with this Commission to place it in a way that is clear to the public what's taking place. That the demands of the shortfall on the pension system in the general fund forces the city to tap into the Glendale Water and Power and grab the money that is critical for the maintenance of this utility and move it over. And no other expense has been so damaging to the general fund than the pension increases that occurred in 2001 and 2005. There it is. You put the utility at significant risk, called critical, moved it over so that the city could provide an extra 5 years of pensions to police and fire. That's what we're trading off, and that's why it's relevant to present it here. You know, usually when I bring this up, in the past, I got interrupted by the then representative of the city attorney's office. I'd like to suggest that in addition to that evaluation of the aging of the infrastructure, that you get an assessment of how many people requires, let's say for every $1 million in capital improvement reduction, how much staff is attached to that, or for every $10 million, you have X amount. So that when you say we're going to have $20 million of deferred infrastructure, it means X number of staff members assigned to that $10 million. That gives you a fairly direct way of evaluating what it means in terms of staffing requirements when you reduce $10 million in infrastructure repair. Thank you.
Thank you. Next agenda item, please.
Just one comment before we move on. One thing I would ask for maybe in the future, I don't know if we have this or not, when we take a look at this negative budget that we're in today, and we have a 4-year forecast of how we're going to come out of it, I'm assuming there are some projections and forecasts done accordingly. I would really like to see a forecast of that, of what our budgetary position, cash position should be 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years out, so that we don't evaluate this 4 years later and say, you know what, we were wrong or we were right. Rather, we evaluate it 6 months later and a year later and say, we're on the right target. If changes need to be made, it's made sooner rather than later. One report I would request is a follow-up. We can all kind of get our arms around it.
Great. We produce that report regularly.
Thank you.
Next agenda item, please.
3B, 90-day assessment and GWP organizational chart. Steve Zern.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, you all have a copy of the report that I did as my observations and assessments and opinions and some of the key areas that I focused on in the first 3 months that I was on the job, and some of the things that I think are going to be very important in the very near future that we need to focus on, and you can expect we're going to hear a lot more of those types of things. You know, in the general management category, the first category I used, I talked a little bit about just the management philosophy, and it's more or less my philosophy, and bringing that into the department and being consistent in the message I send, and you know, some of the basic tenets of fiscal austerity and you know, tremendous customer service, safety, and respect and fairness in how we treat our employees. Those are just things that, and by no means was I implying that the utility staff and GWP staff wasn't doing that already, because I think, as I mentioned in there, what I found in the first 90 days of getting out and meeting and greeting was this is a great group of people who are dedicated to what they do. And again, I will say it is a privilege and an honor to be able to serve with them. But a couple of things that I did find, and that was that the individual divisions and operations tended to operate more independently than I'm comfortable with. I use the term silos because in some respects that was true. They kind of handled all of their own business. There wasn't a tremendous amount of communication between the various divisions, at least on a regular working basis. So those are just things that I think are essential to how we operate, and so we've opened up those lines of communication. Obviously, it's a little bit easier with the structure we have now because we've consolidated some of those, and if the water and electric operations aren't talking to each other, Ramon's got a little bit of a problem. So I think that helped a lot, but it was just one of the things I observed. Organizationally, we did some restructuring. Again, this was primarily as a result of the retirement incentives that allowed us to do many of these things. And we were talking a little bit earlier about the org chart that we included. And so here you see where essentially we had 4 assistant general managers. We now have 2. And virtually all the operations have been consolidated under them. What you see in yellow is what on the left you'll see that's Steve Linz's operations. In yellow is what he's taken on. Those were primarily under Ned Basson previously. On the right-hand side, the far right side, is Ramon Abueg's operations. And again, in yellow you see what he's taken on, which is primarily the water operations and also the environmental program specialist. And then, as I mentioned, the customer service operation is going to remain a direct report to me at this time. So this is how the new org chart rolls out. Again, I'll point out a couple of places. Under the IT, we eliminated an administrator at that particular position. Under the water, electric, and power, I mentioned in my report that the highest level engineer, principal civil engineer, principal mechanical engineer, principal electric engineer, they were all vacated due to retirement. We have no plans to refill those. So after the AGMs, those are 3 of the highest positions within our organization. So we're going to rely on senior engineers in each of those, and I think we're going to be just fine. Also, I mentioned that we We had a couple situations, like I talked about the hire back. At the power plant, we lost both the principal engineer, who was essentially in charge of the power plant operation, and we lost one of two power plant supervisors. So that is one area we're going to come back and hire one position back. So for the two that we're eliminating, we'll hire one plant manager back to assist Steve with the overall operation of the plant. We haven't had a true plant manager for quite some time, since the retirement of the last individual. I think it's a good move. Steve and I talked about this, to have somebody who has direct plant operational experience, and I think he or she could more than handle the operation with the one supervisor, picking up both of the tasks from an operations and a maintenance standpoint in the facility. The other position that we're going to bring back is a safety officer, actually create. We've never had an official safety administrator, safety officer position in the utility. What's happened is the supervisors from each of the operations have essentially acted as safety officer. So an electrical supervisor, a water supervisor, and a power plant supervisor would pick up the duties of being a safety officer. And just on the face of the issues involving safety in each of these operations, from the chemical use and in the water operation to the obvious high voltage situation in electric and the power plant as well, I think it would behoove us to have a dedicated utility safety officer. It is something that we are one of the few utilities that doesn't have somebody dedicated to that. This position would work directly for me, but would also work very closely with the city safety administrator. And that way we would not have supervisors pulling double duty. We have somebody fully dedicated to this. And again, safety on its face alone, not to mention all of the growing regulations and requirements we have in regards to safety. And I don't think we can ever put too much into safety, and can never emphasize too much the importance of safety. So that was one of the other positions that I would intend to bring back. The next area was the financial management. And again, this was my observations, where it was somewhat decentralized in how it functioned. I'm sure it had functioned fine. There's a finance administrator. It's just, again, my comfort level, and I think the quality assurance and quality control is better suited to having the financial management more centralized, and making the highest level managers directly responsible for the day-to-day financial activities of their operations, so they know where the money is going, they know where it's being spent. We also, I think you recall meeting Eric Campbell, our new finance administrator. So the other component of that is everything will funnel through Eric. So as he is integral in putting the budget together and managing the budget, we do not leave him out of anything in regards to managing our finances, so that we make sure that we're always current, always on top. Another thing, excuse me, another thing was the utility has a little bit different type of budgeting system than the rest of the city does, and while there are certain unique qualities to a utility versus a general fund operation, I don't see any need, nor does our finance director see any need for us to run two separate budgeting and financial management systems. So my goal will be, starting next fiscal year, or leading up to next fiscal year, ready to implement at the beginning of the fiscal year, is to get GWP on that same course as the rest of the city operations and departments are on. Again, all keeping with the theme that I mentioned in my general management philosophy is, first and foremost, Glendale Water and Power has to realize they are a division, a department within the city, like every other department in the city, and we need to make sure that we stay together as a city and function as a city and function as an integral component of that city operation, but no better, no worse than any other department. So maybe that's more of a mindset, maybe more of something that's inherent in a utility operation, but I like, for me, again, the comfort level is keeping us together as a city. I think we work very well as a city, and I think that this department, again, is fantastic and will do nothing but complement and contribute to the city. I mentioned purchasing and warehouse management. This is just an area that I zeroed in on. Again, there's a lot more to come. This was a short 90 days, but I noticed again it seemed that operationally, some of the operations were handling a lot of their purchasing and material management. Again, for quality control purposes, inventory control purposes, I believe this should all funnel through a single warehouse. We have a warehouse, and that's really where it should come through. You should order through the warehouse. It should be procured by the warehouse. It should be distributed by the warehouse. That's the proper way to do things, so that we don't have individual stocks of tools and materials and that kind of thing. And that's the perception I had. At least in some cases, that was a bit decentralized. So I've asked Michelle Flynn, our city auditor, to have her staff take a look at that and evaluate how that function works in GWP, especially down at the yard operations, and see if there's some improvements we can make there or some retooling that we can do to make that a little bit more efficient. And again, it just enhance the quality assurance and the quality control. Passing the red face test and being able to say, we've got this documented, these are the procedures we follow, these are the kind of things that we do when we purchase anything. One of the things I noticed quickly with Water and Power is when they buy things, they aren't cheap. Everything's expensive. And it isn't like brooms and shovels sometimes at the Public Works warehouse. You buy some stuff here and it's awfully costly. So we just have to be extra vigilant in how we handle the management of those kind of things. Again, I didn't see anything that alarmed me. I didn't see anything that I thought was a red flag. It just happens to be somewhere I think we can make improvements and streamline and centralize the warehousing function.
I want to note that we should also focus or make sure that we satisfy the MeBe-Weebie requirements. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Again, let me go back to financial management too, because it reminded me of something. Part of that whole decentralization is we had a lot of P cards that were issued to the staff, because I think we had decentralized the financial management to the point that individuals were on their own to purchase certain materials and supplies. It was a lot more than I was comfortable with, so I took back approximately 55 of those P cards. So now we just have a select few top-level managers who have those cards. Again, all of this very consistent with how I run things in the Public Works Department. As I said to the staff, believe me, I'm not picking on you. Just call across the street and ask them. They'll tell you, yeah, he's a cheap you-know-what, and he is with us, and I'm sure he will be with you. But as I say, we look at this as spending it like, it's not our money, like it's the citizens' money, and we need to be very, very diligent and vigilant in how we do that. The next area that I looked at was the energy trading function, and that's one of the things we took advantage of Eric Campbell, who comes from a couple different utilities, including LADWP, where he was in the trading operation, where he was in the risk management part of it. Again, nothing I saw that was alarming or concerning, but just, I think, a due diligence on our part that we go through that operation, take a look at the policy we have. We have an energy risk management policy that the council has approved, so we wanted to go through and look, is it time to update that? Do we need to make any changes to it? There's an energy risk management committee that meets. My understanding was it met somewhat infrequently, so I think it's important for that group, and it includes not only GWP top management, it includes the city manager's office, it includes the finance director, it includes the city attorney's office, and the auditor as well. So I think it's important that we meet regularly and talk about what the trends are in that particular operation. It's a large dollar operation. And as I said in my report, the lifeblood of a utility. It's mine, fuel, and power for our customers. So we're going through that process. I'm hoping to have something by maybe the end of this calendar year, hopefully a little sooner. And we'll bring that and present it to the commission on our way to moving forward to showing the council that particular document. But we'll run that by you, show you what we found, show you some of the changes we're proposing. And
beyond the changes here.
Beyond the changes here, yeah, there's more to come. Really, what's happening there is I've commissioned an overall review of the operation and the policy, so we need to come back with what the specifics of what we found and what we think we need to do to bolster that. And again, I talk about the electrical revenue enhancement here, not a new subject. We talked a lot about it in the budget presentation and the need for us to begin to prepare ourselves both with the rate structure review and tuning up our outreach campaign and getting ready for the spring when we're going to come back out and begin to get input from the community, and then eventually bring that to the commission and the council with our recommendation. I don't know what the rate proposal will look like. I've been asked it will be the same one you proposed. Likely not. But at this time, until I get the rate restructure analysis back and we take a look at what the actual numbers in the budget are and the fund at the time, is when we can set what we think is the best structure, most tenable structure for us to pursue. Likely we'll pursue also a bond. That bond will probably be in the neighborhood of a $60 million bond that we can be pretty close to on. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please finish, and I'll go after you.
I mentioned here the water bond issue, which we're moving forward on. We're looking at a $35 million bond there. That money is going to primarily be pushed into the conveyance system, the distribution system. We have a lot of old pipes and valves. That's what I call the backbone of the system, the bread and butter of the system. And I think it's important that we address that. There's also the SCADA component that's on there, which is important for the communication, but really that pipeline, and we're looking at up to 100,000 linear feet of pipeline. I think it's time. Some of this pipeline is 80, 90 years old. I don't know if you recall that a few months ago we had a main break on Glendale Avenue. It's 1920s pipe, and we had a heck of a time getting the water to shut off in the pipe to fix it. Not to mention a heck of a time just patching the pipe. But it's something that happened at 11 o'clock in the morning. We didn't finish until about 11 o'clock the next morning. We worked all night. We had, we had to crank the fire hydrants to try to relieve the pressure. And so those are the kind of things that I'd like to address and get that really old cast iron pipe out of the system and upgrade that. So I think, again, the bread and butter, the distribution system, it's important for us to invest some money in that at this point in time. And then I listed a number of future challenges. We talked a little bit about the ongoing restructuring and some of the things that we're still looking at doing. We've got our bargaining unit negotiations that continue. Renewable energy, big topic for the future. As we begin to hit some of our compliance deadlines on that, and as you know, we have to have our 33% in 2020, and we're right around 20% right now, but as oftentimes happens with these mandates, that last 10 to 15% can really be a killer as far as cost and so forth. And we've got some options out there on different projects that we have to look at whether or not we want to exercise those. The market's changing a little bit. Solar's getting more competitive, so maybe we need to look more at that. There's several SCAPA projects that are on the horizon, of which we could very well partner up on those as well. But this is going to be something we're going to need to take a really hard look at and pretty quickly about some of the commitments we're going to make there. And it's not cheap, as you all know. So as we begin to move in this direction and move away from less cleaner burning alternatives such as coal, it's going to raise the cost of how we do business, but at the same time, it's something we need to do. And again, in that same regard, we have the carbon cap and trade program, which is part of the AB 32 and the greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And that program goes into effect next year. I think we're looking pretty good for next year as far as the allowances we have. But again, the basic concept there is that the cleaner burning alternatives you purchase and use, the better it is for you. But if you're still relying heavily on some of the less cleaner burning like coal, then you'll have to find yourself buying allowances in order to be able to meet the mandates. Those allowances are sold at a state-run auction, and they can run pretty high. So that is ultimately could raise the cost of electricity by as much as $50 a megawatt. It's a competitive variable price that can jump depending on what the market dictates, but it can be quite expensive. So again, that's more the push for us to get the renewables going at the same time, depending on how quickly we can come off some of the less cleaner burning fuels. And in some of our SCAPA projects that we're involved in are beginning to come up as well. And we have to make some critical decisions on what the future holds for us in regards to those projects. Do we want to be part of the conversion from coal to natural gas, let's say? Is that something we want to do? It isn't cheap. I mean, the coal plant and the IPP coal plant was $5.5 billion to build. So I can imagine the conversion, could be very, very expensive as well. So do we want to be part of that, or what are our other alternatives? And again, many of these things, as you can see, begin to intermingle with each other. Talk about the repowering of Grayson and what we want to do there. We spoke about that a little bit earlier. Do we go 100% purchase? Do we build something smaller that meets our needs for spinning reserve? Do we build something bigger and bring partners into the project? Our friends in Los Angeles, they're always interested in bringing more power in. And so, anytime we've talked to them about this particular project, they've shown a great deal of interest. So those are all things that we're going to have to vet out and come up with options and then bring them back to both the Commission and eventually the Council on what we want to propose for going forward in the future. Again, these are not going to be inexpensive undertakings. But nonetheless, we need, you're pegging the future. Like we've heard today, the original portions of this power plant were put in 1941. In fact, I think they were interrupted by the outbreak of World War II, or the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And we have some documentation that shows you that they stopped in putting in some of the equipment in order to respond to that particular situation. So they've been in there for a while. And so we're going to need to take our time and figure out what it is. We're making decisions well for the next 60, 70, 80 years with regards to that plant. We want to make sure that we have as much information as possible when we make those decisions and make it as educated a decision as we possibly can. The utility modernization program, and we talked a lot about that today. This is the advanced metering. This is the grid upgrades. And Mr. Abweg's 4 kV to 12 kV program, which is really critical. I mean, it brings our distribution system up to, or our transmission system up to more modern standards. It improves the quality. It reduces the loss of energy across the lines, and it is just where we need to be going. So we want to make sure that we keep that momentum alive and well, in addition to getting the billing system up, getting that customer interface portion fully operational. And even beyond our original $70 million program, we're going to end up continuing to invest money in this modernization effort as we go forward in the future. And that's also dependent on the revenue enhancement as well. So that's essentially where I focused, and my work continues, as you might expect, and there'll be other areas that we need to look into, but these were some of the first and some of the more critical that I saw when I was first brought on for the job, and where we are moving forward at this point. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I'll go first. Thank you so much for your updating us on your efforts of reorg and also the upcoming initiatives. I do have a request referring to this presentation we went over earlier.
Yes.
The critical defer and prudent utility practice defer. A lot of times things don't really turn out, the way you think it would. So I would request that the management keep an eye on this, evaluate to see how these different programs are going to be impacted with no funding. I know they're going to be deferred. You mentioned spring. We're going to look at it again. If we could be briefed maybe quarterly until we get the next rate increase on the different initiatives here, especially if there are negative impacts on some of these programs. When we want to look at those, we want to hear about those.
Absolutely.
Great, thanks.
I have a couple, yeah.
Well, just want to start off with congratulations, Mrs. Zoen, for your permanent appointment to Glendale Water and Power. But that brings me to the question of what was agreed upon, or how will you allocate your time between GWP and Public Works, just to start off?
I don't have any precise allocation of time. Obviously, more time, at least now and probably into the near future, will be spent with GWP. My operations in Public Works, I'm much more familiar with, and I have a group of managers who, they're all my managers that I've hired, and more than confident in their ability to keep things running. So probably more of my time will be spent with GWP as I learn and become more familiar with the staff
Well, that goes with the allocation of time versus the cost allocation, because I guess you mentioned that GWP should be weaved into the overall city operation, but in terms of how GWP is paying for your time versus public works so that we can allocate that into rates, I mean, that's all relevant in my opinion. So it'd be good to maybe anticipate how much time you can dedicate to GWP so that staff or the commission will know that that's what we're paying for and not subsidizing public works, even though we're all one big unit. But it'd be good to understand from a public's perspective that you allocate, let's say, 75 or 80% of your time to GWP so that staff or people know that that's where you're dedicating most of your efforts and resources, so that if there's any type of management issues, then they will be aware that that's where you should be focusing your time because you're getting paid from 70 or 80% from GWP, for example.
Yeah, and Mr. I don't know that we'll ever be able to pinpoint exactly how much time, but you make a good point because there are other non-general fund operations of which I'm responsible for as well. The sewer fund, the refuse fund, the parking fund, the transit fund. So there's a way to spread my salary in a lot of different areas, and I think that's one thing we'll probably address in the upcoming budget year as to how we do that.
So that brings me to the next level, just going down to
Sure.
here. So we understand that you reorganized recently to 2 chief administrative general manager, and the out of 4, I mean 50% reduction is quite a hit. But I'm also concerned about the manpower and the loss of expertise in consolidating the water works into the electric services. How would you measure the effectiveness of that reorganization, and potentially how would that result in the outcome of any lost expertise or lost knowledge of the water side now that you eliminated the AGM in water and also the principal engineers pretty much? So you're losing a lot of brain power. So how will you measure the successful or the effectiveness of this reorg?
Well, Mr. I think I speak for Mr. Aboeg as well. Yes, we did lose some high-level managers and some very good managers, but I think we have more than enough capable staff. So I'm actually not that concerned about what we may have lost in tribal knowledge or professional expertise. I think we're going to get that. Mr. Aboeg is obviously going to have to come up to speed on the water issues. One of the areas that we did, both of us had concern was the water quality issue, so that's one of the areas we are going to bring back somebody. And in the meantime, we have a consulting engineer assisting us in the water operations, doing an evaluation of that operation in many respects to tell us that, to see where we might have some areas that we need to shore up. But I think overall, I'm very confident that we'll be fine just the way we are. I think the consolidation isn't never necessarily a desperation effort just because of the situation we're in. It's something that I likely would have done in the best of times, given the opportunity and the vacancies we had. So I'm confident. We'll continue to watch it. I think, as we improve what you saw, I mean, we're starting with a pretty low point. So, how would I evaluate the success? We climb out of the hole we're in right now and get us back to even par, and we begin to run our O&M in a very cost-conscious manner. We get our projects done on time and under budget. I think that's the primary way that I'll evaluate how that operation is moving forward. I can tell you we've made many changes in just getting ready for our future capital programs, how we design, how we put the bid specifications together, how we manage the actual construction of those projects. I found some pretty gaping holes, if you will, right off the bat that I'm having to address in other ways. Change orders is one. And so I've made, with Mr. Aboeg's assistance, we've made some changes in that regard. We've brought in some of the philosophies of the Public Works Department, whose engineering division is an excellent and very well-run operation, and you can gauge that by on-time and under-budget performance, lack of change orders and things like that. Any measurable metric you want to use. And so some of the successes that they've experienced are transferable to the water operation as well. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We're kind of taking successes that others have had in the city and applying those as well. So I'm very confident that we'll be fine. We want to make sure that we keep that water quality operation top-notch at all times, so we're relying on some other folks to give us some perspective on that as well, but I think we're going to be just fine.
How long do you expect to have the consultant for water quality?
I think we on the outside, we had expected to have him for a total of like 3 months based on time. But we can use him longer. He's getting ready to give us his, at least first draft report of his assessment of the construction operation, the water quality operation, and the overall management of the operation.
And this is a water engineer?
Yes.
So I didn't mean to. Sorry.
I have a few more questions.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm also a fair person. I like to give people chances to work out those issues. And I do agree that it's a good move in terms of reorganization to maybe consolidate some function that might be potentially seem obsolete or excessive. But I think that one of the measures that we should be mindful of in the future is that you mentioned earlier, water breaks, water quality, some of these things that could be impacted when there's reduction in expertise or historical knowledge. So that's something that we want to keep an eye on. If there's water quality issues that continue to be recurring, even with a consultant, that might not help because we lack people who have maybe additional knowledge or testing in the past that could help boost the water quality, or if you see line breaks that need to be upgraded where maybe it's not being paying attention to as closely because we don't have the expertise in-house anymore. So those are the type of metrics that I want to keep in mind when we continue to talk about these reorganizations, so that if we need to maybe change directions, that's something that we want to maybe bring back to you as well.
Yeah, and those are good points, Mr. Yao. Again, let me repeat on the water quality side. Outside of that top-level management, there hasn't been reorganization of those folks. So the key technicians, the key supervisors, the key managers, the folks who do the testing, they are all in place. In fact, the one vacancy we did have at environmental program specialist, we're refilling that as well with a water quality expert in that particular field. So yeah, it's very important to me. As far as water breaks go, I hope 1,000 lineal feet of pipe replacement does a lot to reduce that, but you're absolutely right. Overall system failures, whether it's the water or electric side, will be watched very closely. That's quality control and quality assurance, and we want to make sure that we always have the highest level of that. But again, something I alluded to earlier, we want to make sure we don't cut too far down into the organization and affect some of those core tenants and core services that we provide. But I'm, again, very comfortable with where we are in the water operation at this time.
One last item. I do commend you for trying to look closely towards the energy trading business, and I do think that it's better to have more frequent audits. As you recall, I mean, it's tough to understand what's happening with that risk management plan. And I think it's good that you're bringing that back, maybe bubbling up to the surface and bringing more attention to that, because I think it's one of the risks that the city can't afford to miss. I mean, if something happens, it could pretty much sink this department as well as the whole city. So I think I commend you for bringing that up, that this could be a major issue, that you brought El Campbell in and maybe trying to have more independent eyes looking at it. So it's a good thing that you're doing that.
Other questions? I have one question. Mr. Yao covered the second one I had. Under the Grayson Repowering Project section,
Yes, sir.
you mentioned that you're currently analyzing and developing a report and options for consideration. Is there a time frame of when that report will be ready?
I'm looking to Mr. Lenz to see. We had not put any specific schedule on that because what we were hoping was anticipating we're going to get some initial feedback, and then we're going to go back and do some more work. This is going to be a lot of back and forth. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. President, members of the Commission, we have moved that project to SCAPA with the anticipation of potentially bringing in some partners. So we're in the process of starting a SCAPA project, and we are anticipating probably a 6 to 12-month process to fully vet all the alternatives and make a decision on how we want to move forward with that.
But so 6 to 12 months to just have the options in front of us, but isn't that very directly related to the bonding issue and the future rate increase issue? I mean, that's a huge capital commitment potentially. So if that's 6 to 12 months, I mean, how's that going to line up with?
Actually, the rate restructure, the rate or revenue enhancement and bond that we're proposing for the spring would not include this. No, this would be something separate we'd have to come back with. And as Steve mentioned, if we end up going with some sort of cooperative agreement, joint agreement through SCAPA, it comes out a different, entirely different way. It still may mean revenue enhancements in addition to that, but what we have included in the bond issue that we're proposing for next spring would be just some routine upgrades to the existing plant facilities.
And then the SCAPA project, once you make a decision, you would have SCAPA bonds, and you'd have to figure out how to work that revenue requirement into our budget. And I think we're going to try to come up with some estimates for that for the rate structure folks and see if we can work that in. But at this point, it's we don't have a project yet.
But also based on your previous presentation, is that some of those items, in terms of maintenance or issues have to do with how much more you're going to keep investing in those units versus doing something completely new.
That's true, and that the one example that I mentioned earlier tonight about the Unit 4 boiler, water wall retubing, we may never do that, depending on how quickly we get a repower. Because if you're going to put those new tubes in and the life's 10 or 15 years, and you're going to just, scrape it and put a new unit there in 3 to 5 years, it may not make sense.
Okay. Well, if we can stay posted on that, obviously, and as that develops, look to have that on a future agenda so that we can help with the thought process on that as we get closer.
We can do that.
I have one quick comment. I just wanted to concur briefly with what Commissioner Yao was getting at. I won't belabor the points because he made them all very well, but I just wanted to express my concurrence with him that I think that there are it's a good time to experiment and belt tighten, and you're the new person in charge, and of course have the authority and discretion to get the team under you that you want and that you have confidence in. But I think the residents are going to want to see moving forward that on the water side, we've got the engineering expertise to do this massive project that you yourself are talking about, anticipating the use of the bond revenues. We're going to need, the community's going to want to have reassurance that you've got a team together with waterside expertise, and I don't think we can go forever with in any way being too short-sighted about that. And I know that you'll make prudent management decisions on that. The other thing is I also have some concerns about you doing these two really important jobs of directing two big important agencies, and you don't need to comment any further on that. But I think the community knows you, trusts you. You've got a long history in our community of doing the public works, and you're coming into this position with a lot of community gratitude and respect for what you've accomplished in your career on that side. That said, wearing two hats of two big important entities is a lot. So I want to wish you well as you take on the since you wrote this as interim manager, the community might not be fully aware that the permanent place. So I wanted to welcome you as well.
Thank you.
And thanks a lot for the organizational chart. I'm going to I feel like laminating mine, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Please keep us posted as you make further decisions.
Oh, no
Not
problem.
on a day-to-day basis, but it really is helpful to us to see the boxes. What are the yellow boxes?
Those were where I was showing the new responsibilities for the two general managers. So those are essentially the areas that fell under the previous
Got it.
two that have retired.
Thanks.
Comments? All right, we do have one speaker, Mr. Herbert Milano. Since we are running tight on time, I'm not going to limit the time, but anything you can do in terms of gifting time back is most appreciated.
Clever. Gift of time.
I'm in a giving mood. Thank you very much. GWP Commission President and members of the GWP Commission. The words that I'm about to bring, I do not mean in any way to disrespect anyone, but I just want to give you, from a public's point of view, something that I've seen as a trend in the city of Glendale for quite some time. I was in these chambers when the previous director, Steiger, was being presented. We heard all of his laudable qualifications. And then, of course, we we experience, through his tenure, all kinds of laudable reports as well. I also was in this chamber when the previous police chief was, Chief Adams was actually presented, all the laudable qualifications. So pardon me if I am a little bit more skeptical, not cynical, but skeptical of the directorship that we have today. So I decided to bring to you a new position that's currently available in the city of Santa Rosa for a director of utilities. And I browsed through this and I asked myself the question, if our current director were to apply for a job at this utility, could he get the job? And towards the end of this list, there's a series of qualifications necessary. And I just leave it up to you, because even though it may be said that it's not under your purview, the decisions that take place, the capital improvements that must take place, the tens of millions of dollars, the evaluation of safety, and the holes that we have with regard to the water utility, place a significant amount of risk within the city, and I think that it is up to this commission to evaluate, highlight this, and ask yourself the question that I asked myself. I believe that the water utility has some significant risks involved. I respect Mr. Abweg. When he ran the electrical utility, as he's running, he did all the things that I would expect any director to do. You know, identify the problems, set a set of agendas and objectives for them, tell you what the funding was needed, put the projects in place, and see the outcomes continually. So I admire that in him. But this is a whole area that has significant regulatory requirements and significant knowledge about safety. Safety of the population depends significantly on this water quality situation. And here is my perception with regard to experience, and I can tell you from a consultant in the IT sector in what it means. Besides that the failure rate of many organizations in IT is very high, the experience as you go through the industry really plays significantly in identifying future risks. So that if you had a director that had come to you from multiple utilities, he's not only bringing you the knowledge of a significant number of entities, best practices, errors that have occurred, and a significant amount of experience that could be put into play. Now here's where I see the benefits. The benefits of having this common knowledge of the common operations where things could be consolidated and implemented. One of those areas is, for example, a project management office. You got the public works with a significant amount of projects. We have the Glendale Water and Power with a significant number of projects. Having a consolidated set of procedures citywide for a PMO office, would be ideal. But that was cut out of this particular budget. So what I want to say to you in very quick summary is that we need a director who's going to be able to challenge the city council, challenge the city manager, and do some pushback and defend the Glendale Water and Power. And sometimes that can come in from somebody who's totally independent. I wish Mr. Zern the best of success in really consolidating and presenting things to the public in a way that we know for sure that they're being accomplished. I just wanted to express a significant amount of skepticism with regard to his appointment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next agenda item.
3C, customer service update. Tammy Bellier.
Good afternoon, President Armenian and members of the Commission. I'm Tammy Vallier, Customer Services Administrator. Today I'm going to be reporting on the 2012-13 Annual Customer Services Report. This report is not the annual comparisons that I normally provide you. We have not seen the extreme variations from year to year as we once did. So I thought it might be a little bit more interesting and beneficial for you to see some of the components within each of the service areas that we provide. First, customer contacts. Most importantly, customers need to be able to easily and readily be able to contact us to request their service, to report power outages, to ask general billing questions. This first slide shows just how GWP customers are doing business with us. You can see that most customers, 60%, Actually talk to a live customer service agent, either at the front counter or over the telephone. And 40% are choosing self-service options. Of the 40%, 39% are using the IVR, which is our interactive voice response unit. And while 1.6% of electronic correspondence may seem low, we still responded to over 3,000 requests, and we did so in 24 hours. That goal of 24 hours is very important to us because those correspondents come in and we're able to respond to them during our non-peak hours. So we do encourage customers to do business with us that way, and so we'll maintain that 24-hour turnaround time goal as long as we can. So we receive about 10,000 phone calls per month. Why do so many people call us? Well, 32% of these have bill inquiries. And in this category, it's basic bill questions. How much is my bill? Did you receive my payment? What's the late fee for? Just very general questions. That's the majority of why people call. The next highest contact is for service request, which includes move-ins, move-outs, transfers of service. And then that's followed by account maintenance, which could be a change to a mailing address. It could be somebody adding their spouse on as an authorized user. It could be when they signed up for service, they didn't have their social security number, so they call us back with that information.
Quick question on that. Did I hear you correctly? You said the total number of telephone inquiries a month is 10,000, or is that just, did you say the billing inquiry phone calls?
No, 10,000 telephone calls per month.
10,000 phone calls per month?
We average about 120,000 per year.
And how many, I know you've told us this before, I should have it memorized, I'm sorry. So how many phone staffers do you have?
Oh, it really varies. We typically had about 10, but we have deployed. We lost the collections supervisor, and so we've redeployed staff from collections part to call center, collections part to billing, wherever the desk function fit appropriately. So right now we're down probably, I would say, 8, but through this process we'll have more cross-training, so some of the collections folks will be able to answer the phone and pull from the other areas as needed. But typically, to provide good service over the telephone, 10 CSURs is manageable.
And are you getting, or do you see any trends in terms of increasing calls because of the smart meters or anything like that, or is it relatively the same?
The number of calls is the same. It's very consistent. The length of the calls, and I'll speak to that a little bit later, but our telephone calls are definitely taking longer. So in contrast, at the front desk, the majority of transactions are related to public benefits programs, and these customers want to spend more time. They want to talk to the customer service rep about the different programs, how the program may or may not benefit them. Some of these customers need translation assistance. Some of them just need help with the application, and they don't understand exactly what backup requirements they need to submit with it. So they come in the office where they can sit down and they don't feel like they're being rushed. The next most frequent request at the front counter is service request again. Not everybody knows that we do that over the telephone. Or they may have an issue with an old account and they need to come in to resolve that before they open a new account. And then account maintenance. And most of the account maintenance customers are customers who could not complete their application over the telephone. We couldn't validate their identity with experience. They have to come in and show an ID or passport. Moving on to the payments, we received 570,000 payments. You may be somewhat surprised to see that the majority of our customers are paying their utility bills electronically. And this is the first year that we've actually seen the electronic payments surpass the traditional form of mailing in your payment. Electronic payments were quickly adopted in this community. Our customers seem to have a higher acceptance rate than our comparison cities. And in fact, in 2010, APPA did a survey, and The average was 6%, and back in 2010, we were already at 36%. So this is one area that our customers really were attracted to and continue to use. The area where we're seeing a decrease is mailed payments. So we still have the same number of walk-in customers that are coming in, the same number of customers that use the drop box. So they're moving from mailed-in payments directly to the electronic payments.
Are we accepting credit card payments?
We do.
The electronic?
We
Okay.
accept credit card payments at the cashier station, over the IVR system, and on the web.
Okay, including American Express?
No.
No.
No, and that was a policy set by the city treasurer's office due to the cost.
Thank you.
Clearly, you're not paying electronic.
I am, actually, but through my checking account.
Oh, okay.
After they kept turning down
Routing
American
it through
Express.
my checking account, so I'm not using my credit card.
The next slide is the electronic payment methods that our customers are using. You can see that customers prefer using the GWP website eCare. That's closely followed by their own financial institution's website. I was actually surprised by that number. I thought it was reversed. I thought that most people were using the home banking. So it is interesting that people are going to our website, and it's a good thing because then
Charging
they can see,
on credit card.
charging on credit card or e-check.
Or e-check, right.
But they're also then visiting our website in general and can see other things. We approved over 23,000 payment extensions. These numbers do not seem to vary much year to year, but I did want to include it. I know this has been an ongoing area of interest for you, but you can see it doesn't change. It's very, very similar every single year, so it's up to you. I may take this out and then bring it back to you if I see some other
Was it
fluctuation.
lower pre-2008 when really the economy started turning downward?
I could go back 1 year. I don't think so. I don't think it was a huge jump. This is the percent of abandoned calls and indicates how many customers drop out of the queue prior to a customer service representative answering the call. There's a few things I want to point out on this slide. The first two horizontal lines, the solid line is the goal of 3%, and this has been our goal for many years, but we've struggled with meeting this goal over the last few years. So APPA's goal for 2011, actually, their first quartile is 4.09. So we are raising our goal to be 4.0 so we actually can meet it. And this comes into play because our calls are taking longer, and customers do want to spend more time on the call. And then up above, you could see where we've circled some of the factors as to why we did not meet the goal, such as power outages, evacuations, system slow time. If we have any system downtime whatsoever, it impacts our call center.
You don't have a circle for staff shortages, unfilled vacancies, or layoffs?
No, I actually could have put that up there, but in reality, we try and pull resources from other areas.
So far, you're feeling comfortable at the staffing level you have?
I'm a little bit uncomfortable right now, but I think in the near future, when we have this cross-training, we have 4 new staff members that look really good, and they're going to have like a 6-month learning curve. So I think once we, a few months down the line, I think we're going to be in a good position.
Can you remind the public APPA? You mention it every now and then, and we don't spell it out.
It's American Public Power Association.
It's the association that represents municipal utilities.
Correct.
Thank you.
The next slide is our write-off to revenue. We've been very consistent in this area as well. Overall, 0.15%. For GWP services, it's lower at 0.13%. And then finally, eCare. eCare is the customer web portal that we have had since 2002. We're actually looking to upgrade that in the near future. It allows customers to view their bill, They can look at their payment history, they can print previous bills, they can make a payment, they can view consumption history, they can actually compare their consumption to similar houses on the street, and they can enroll in paperless billing, which is why I'm showing you this chart today. Almost 30,000 or 36% of our customers are enrolled in eCare. 58 of those enrolled receive an e-bill, but also a hard copy bill as well. 20% of those enrolled only receive the e-bill. So you need to keep in mind that that's 20% of the enrolled, but only 6% of our customer base. So we would love to see this grow. Marketing is promoting that in all of our communications, but it's just one of those things where customers are either comfortable with it or they're not. So hopefully in the near future they'll start to be more comfortable, just like they are the payments.
Do you do any sort of promotion to try and encourage people to move to e-bill?
Well, we do communications. As far as promotions or incentives, no.
With the write-off, I see electric, that's over $200,000. Can you share with us some of the reasons why we may have to write off?
Oh, why we would write off an account after 6 months of a customer closing their account and not receiving payment for 6 months. So we write the account off. We still try to collect, and during that time it's actually at a collection agency, but it's been removed from our books.
Okay, so we write off while we are still actually making efforts in collecting.
Correct.
Okay.
And then if they do collect, then it would be netted out of the next write-off month.
Following month. Okay. Okay, thanks.
Are there any further questions?
Any questions from commissioners? Okay, thank you very much. This is very, very informative. I appreciate all the work that's gone into presenting these statistics. It's helpful for us to keep a view on how the customers are reacting to the service we provide. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We are at 6:15. We have one more agenda item. Do we want to keep going and finish that off, or do you want to push it? We've pushed this agenda item several times.
We have. And is this a relatively short presentation? Yeah. Yes, let's do it. Let's
go for it.
And if I
So
may, you
next-
also have the minutes approval that was.
Oh, that was deferred? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
All right, I'll make it quick. If you recall, we were in the same position the last time we tried to bring this up to you. This was last on the agenda, and we had to delay it.
Right.
I'd like to make it quick because I also need to be somewhere relatively soon. Anyway, I think it was Commissioner Chan that asked us about what about undergrounding
It's
after
right
the
after
last.
that major outage. Mhm.
That's correct. Right after the major wind event. But let me just show you the difference. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. This is what we're looking at. This is what some people consider the blight. You know, all this overhead and things that we deal with. There's the transformer, there's the wires. By the way, for the record, this is not blight to me. This is beautiful to me because this is what pays our revenue. So it's a matter of perspective, okay? But what we're trying to do is convert this from overhead. And when we underground it, what you see is all those infrastructure that you see, not quite all of them, but basically what you see in the ground is what we call manhole covers or vaults. And what we do is basically put all the equipment, replace the wires with cables, put the transformers underground, and everything is done underground, so it's below ground, you don't see it. And what's the advantages of an underground system? And these are the things that are pretty obvious. You know, it looks prettier, no blight. Again, matter of opinion. Less exposure to environmental or weather. Oops, I'm sorry.
You're really trying to make it short.
So anyway, there's wire contact due to wind. You know, when the wires slapping together, and no lightning issues. We don't have to worry about tree trimming. The darn squirrels that always attacked us, and vehicular accidents, car heat poles. And this is very important in terms of our statistics, the momentary interruptions when the wires swap together with all the protection that we're doing. The lights would go out for about 10 seconds, go back on. You won't see that with an underground system. And I don't have to deal with Mylar balloons. The Mylar balloons is just, as you know,
You're just trying to express happy birthday to someone, but
now, well, that too, but it's, these are the things.
You love light, hate Mylar balloons. We've established that.
Yeah, so these are the things that we avoid. But the disadvantages, it is a much higher cost to underground the system. The initial cost is higher, replacement cost is higher, repairs are much more expensive, the outages are much longer. It's very difficult for us to locate an underground problem until we try it several times, or until we have the distribution system fully automated.
Smart
We're
grid.
going to be at the modernization that Mr. Stern was talking about. And inspection takes a lot longer. We have to open the vaults, get in, and so forth. We can't just do it visually.
is most of the, when you do have underground, is most of the failure occurs within the vaults, like within equipment in the vaults, or, for example, you also have, the wires going everywhere, right? So you have to pinpoint where that issue might be.
Yeah, we may have cables that fail inside the conduits. So in most of the underground systems that we build, we always have to have a backup duct system, because when we do have failures for underground, it's considered catastrophic. And so we have to have the spare conduits that we call it. So if they do fail inside conduit, we can pull new cables, and so that we can do the repairs later.
So that's kind of part of that higher cost.
That's correct, and I'll show you what those costs are. And we do have, under our General Municipal Code, Section 352, we do have a way to create an underground district to make everything underground. I'll go through it briefly, the different steps. The first thing being the process is we have to define necessity. So the burden on this is for staff to define the necessity. Why do we need to create an underground district? We have to have the right reasons and the cost estimate, relatively good schedule, and the parties affected. The parties affected include other utilities, property owners, and so forth. And then we have to submit that before we start the process. We have to submit that to the City Council, present the necessity, cost estimates, parties affected, and submit that for council consideration. If the council agrees that we need to create an underground district, then we start the public meeting process, where we start meeting first with the other utilities. If you're familiar with our overhead facilities, we have the AT&T, the telecommunication company, we have cable companies, and now with smart meters, we may also have the gas company putting their communications on our poles if they become affected. So, and then we have to identify the different property owners that will be affected by it. Prepare the total cost estimate. The first cost estimate we prepared would be just the one that affects us directly, but this one will include the cost that impact on the other utilities as well as the affected property owners. And then the formal public hearing begins, where we reach out to everyone that's affected by this. Okay, what's the benefit? How does it impact you? Are you willing to pay for that cost to gain the benefit that we identify? So it's open to the public. We notify everyone that's affected, and let them know what the real deal is. And then once we get through the public hearing, it goes back to the City Council and hears it out in public. And if we don't have too many people objecting to it, they might consider it, declare an ordinance, declare an underground district, and that's when we start removing the overhead facilities and start installing. Okay, and then at that point, once we create the underground district, then we have some enforcement, we have some poles, so that we don't underground our system, and then we have the communication company staying overhead. We can force them to do it because it's been done by ordinance. According to the ordinance, if they don't do it, we will do it for them, but we have to bill them for the actual costs. Okay?
How do you determine, do you do any sort of cost allocation, or is it all once city council decides it's GWP's, it goes on GWP's accounts?
No, it's our cost, and then they have to tell us what their cost is. Their cost is their cost, and our cost is our cost.
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking about generally speaking. For example, you know, if a neighborhood really got together and they wanted something underground and they went through this petitioning process for it, you know, other utilities, you would allocate costs to those
That's correct.
those customers, right, at an increased rate level compared to others.
That's correct. That's when we would recommend an assessment district,
Okay.
so that area that's benefiting from it gets assessed, and not all the ratepayers
Pay
get
for
to
it,
pay
yeah.
for it. So. And here's really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. The cost to do an overhead system versus conversion is we're looking at a 3-to-1 difference. The cost per foot of an overhead system is about $300 or so dollars per foot, whereas you're looking at about $915 per foot to do an underground conversion. And what this excludes is the cost. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm different. Is the cost that the other utilities have to borne for the conversion of their facilities. And this is very important because we tried to do this on Foothill back in 03, 02, before my time here. We tried to underground the facilities on Foothill. And what we neglected to point out at that time is the conversion from the street to the panel to the customers will be borne by the customers under this ordinance. The utility doesn't pay for that. Okay, and that cost could be anywhere from $2,500 to $10,000. And some of the installations, some of the panels already have the overhead or underground, but they still have to do the trenching and dig across their property to get to the panel. And that cost, depending on the length and the type of substructure work they need to do, can range from $2,500 to $10,000 per customer. Okay. And what are we doing absent the ability to do that? We're talking about the upgrade from 4 kV to 12 kV. This is what's helping us in reducing the outages that we have, improving reliability. As I pointed out earlier, when we touch a 4 kV system that we have to replace facilities anyway, we would already re-insulate it, reconstruct it. We're doing a lot of fuse coordination projects, refusing. Sectionalizing is something that's new that we're trying. Sectionalizing allows us to the ability to really isolate the areas where we have problems in addition to fusing. This is the smarter technology that we're putting in. We slowed down a little bit on the vegetation because of budget, but we're back. We're very aggressive in doing that to prevent wind-related outages. When we go into our smart grid program, into our modernization, we'll do more of this distribution management system. And every time we encounter a problem with the squirrels, we are putting in squirrel guards to basically prevent the squirrel from chewing the wires, but we encounter a lot of those. And we have a lot of areas to protect. And that's it. And sorry, I rushed, but you asked.
I want to thank you for giving us this presentation. I know we've talked about this for many months, and if you recall, how it came about was right after that huge rainstorm and all of the outages we had. And my question to you at that time was if you thought there were areas where if we had underground circuits, you know, a lot of those outages and safety issues would have gone away. And I think at that point you mentioned maybe, maybe not, but yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. It shows clearly that there's an expense, a huge expense to it. It may prevent some of the outages, but then when there is one, then it takes longer to detect, right? And with smart grid coming, then maybe that would definitely be a better solution than overhead right now. And thanks a lot for giving us that list of mitigation measures.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, we do have a speaker.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Herbert Milano.
Thank you, Commission President Armenian. I'll make it very short. If we could move the clock back 20 years and we're able to listen to a similar conversation in the city of Santa Ana, you probably hear about the same things. It's very costly to do it underground. 20 years later, you have whole sections of the city now significantly improved, significant increases in property values, and significant reduction of blight. Maybe near your homes you don't have that, but I can see many homes where the actual power poles are in front of the homes. It is a significantly blighted part of the city of Glendale that doesn't deserve. If this is going to be a jewel city, I suggest that there be a process by which you commit every year to some segments of the city to continually move towards this direction. Maybe we won't get all the benefits during the time that there are budgetary constraints, but there are some areas where the number of lions is just so numerous. Seriously, it looks like parts of Mexico and India. It's that bad. I suggest that you need to make a commitment so that the city moves, whether it be, a half a mile one year or a mile the next year, but that we move continually towards creating a plan so that 20 years from now, significant segments of the city are not going to be burdened with this blight. Thanks.
Mr. O'Brien, can you comment before you leave whether or not there are, in fact, parts of the city that are like India and other references that Mr. Milano made?
Well, we do have some places where there's a lot of communication wires. I think our wires are getting mistaken with the communication wires. If you see those big block cables, those are telephone wires. And the ones that you see that are lower, the ones where you see the guards that are falling apart, that are normally the communication or cable. We see those, we clean them up. There are some places where, a good example, I drive by it every day. If you drive by Wilson, you'll see wires that looks like they're ugly wires, but none of those are electric. There's a lot of communication wires only that's in the city. So again, it's a matter of perspective. I have a transformer and have wires in my backyard, and
so in that sort of case where it's not our wires but they are on our poles, is there anything ever initiated because of someone else's wires on our poles? Like, do we ever initiate anything, or is it always? Because I think Mr. Milano's point is that there should be some level of initiative on our side proactively, not just waiting for someone to petition. And I think given some areas, customers may not even know they have the right to petition. So that's really the question.
If there's a safety issue, we address it right away. It comes to our attention, even if it's not ours, we will try to deal with it, and we have good contacts. Majority of our poles is what we consider a joint pole. We have joint ownership with a number of utilities, so we do share it. We may be the base owner, but they have that right. And we try to deal with that and there's what we call the General Order 95, which deals with the safety. So we look at the infrastructure, how solid it is, whether it's safe, they meet the clearances. If they meet all those, there's not much really we can do. Before we allow them to install on the poles, we look at that, make sure that we are not doing something that we're overpopulating the pole. So there's some semblance of control. Depending on, again, perspective, there's really not one. I have some pictures of what they refer to as what's in India. We don't have that kind of poles. We do have some poles that are very busy, but not to that point where we consider it it's the same as a third world country.
But is that a criteria that you ever apply? Meaning when you're looking at it clearly from the safety perspective, whether or not the pole is being overloaded and those sorts of things, meeting those standards. Yes. But is the visual aspect of it something that you consider when you're looking at those?
Yeah, that's part of it now, but there's a lot of installation, like Mr. Milano mentioned, that happened 20, 30 years ago. Not much we could do with those. Unless there's a safety issue or there's something that dictates for them to be moved, we can't require them to move.
Like, we can't make a determination from a visual aesthetic perspective to say, we own a joint pole. Now there's a lot of wire. We feel there are a lot of wires from a visual aesthetic perspective where we would go to the joint owner and say, maybe it's time we consider undergrounding.
We have not used that as a criteria for that, but the undergrounding would be up to us. Again, if we decide that aesthetic is our number one priority, and that is a requirement for a certain district, then we certainly can make that case.
Any other
I
questions?
think it would be worth considering at some point in the future, since we're potentially asking our community to tolerate a rate hike and a bond issue. I think it might be of interest to find out what City Council and what the residents feel about this, so that potentially the community could feel that it is at least on the drawing board. As we're thinking ahead, it's something that could be incorporated in future planning documents, so that there's at least a vision if we're going forward. I've lived right under a transformer and poles for 25 years now, and I know it's a subjective matter, and you're probably more fond of them than I am, but I do think that a community of our caliber should have it as a goal, and that especially it's a good time when we're asking people to consider a bond measure. So I just think there's a political palatability to it too.
All right.
So I take it that we currently don't have an overhead to underground
Say
program.
again, sorry?
I take it that Glendale Water and Power at this time does not have an overhead to underground program?
We do not, however.
Because I know many utilities do.
That's correct.
Have we ever had one?
No, we do not. What we do have is any new construction, what we have in electric services requirement for any new construction, if there's underground available, we require that the new contractor has to put their facilities underground.
Oh, okay. So that's why we do have some neighborhoods that are underground.
That is correct. So that was in place, I believe, in the early 90s. It was already put in place. And so the requirement, if you're putting in a new facility, a new panel, we now require that all panels, let's say there's no underground available, there's only overhead, but the panel that we approve has to be able to do both overhead and underground. So if there becomes an underground and we have an option to underground, they won't have to replace the electric panel. So that's something that's a requirement for us. So we're sort of thinking ahead, but we just don't have a means to say that it's, right. Unsightly, therefore we need to underground. We don't have that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Need to address the minutes.
Yes. So the next agenda item, let's go back up to 2A.
2A, approval of the August 6, 2012 meeting minutes.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I don't think you need a motion.
Technically,
We-
for
we
the
just
record,
waited.
you don't need one.
See, this is what happens when you skip a meeting.
Well, no, we just held it off to see if anyone
I don't
had
have any
comments.
problems. Yeah.
That's where we broke
Yeah,
off.
no problem with
Any
it.
comments?
No comment.
Okay.
So hearing none, you can say the
Hearing none,
the minutes stand
I
approved.
consider the minutes approved as presented. A final agenda item? Oh, not final, second to final.
Or oral communications.
Do you have one speaker card, Mr. Milano?
Thank you very much. President Armenian, members of the GWP Commission and staff. My name is Herbert Molano. I wanted to bring up a couple of issues that oftentimes are not covered. They were partially covered in the manager's report, but I want to address the legal potential risks that the GWP may have to consider as you look at your overall budget. One area of interest, and I brought some copies to hand out, is the overcharges or apparent overcharges by the Glendale Water and Power to the Glendale Unified School District and to the Glendale Community College, and perhaps other state entities like the Department of Motor Vehicles. There's a lawsuit in 2007 that was settled concerning the overcharges of capital facilities that were included within the charges to public entities. And there's a specific law in California that forbids the utility for taking all of these additional costs and charging these other public entities with it. Because the Glendale Water and Power has been doing these charges without making allocation for that, you could have millions of dollars in restitution for the Glendale Unified School District, And I presented to them with the same type of information, that it is within their purview to ask for that money. The other is the potential losses concerning the prior water rate transfers that could still come up, and perhaps it would be prudent for the utility to think that it might come forth. The issue that I want to bring in with regard to all of these is that whenever the utility faces itself with a significant shortage of funds, they cannot maintain its capital improvements, the easiest answer of all is issue a bond and do a rate increase. That's the easy answer. Of course, we don't call it rate increases or issuing bonds, we call it revenue enhancements. I wish we would stop the euphemism. But the fact is that it allows the continuation of the problems that exist on the other side of the ledger that is not under your purview, but you, in a way, are our conduit between the public and what happens with City Council. That whenever there is another bond that comes up, there is a side of relief on the general fund side, so maybe they don't need to address the issues that are demanding the transfer. That's the problem. You do a rate increase, there's a side of relief. They don't need to tackle the humongous pension problem that we have that is affecting us. It's roughly about an additional $20 million every year from what it was 9 years ago. There's your budget deficit. Or there's your critical shortage on the electrical. There is no way to disengage it, because if we did not have that problem with the pension problem, we would not have the significant need in making those transfers out of the utility for that purpose. And so I know the utility needs to address the shortages, especially in Adams Hill and many other areas where the water mains are in significant deficient state, and where the electrical utility has such significant need to improve its power generating facilities. But if we issue a bond, then there is no pressure left to put on the City Council to say, address the pension obligation problem. And that's why, even though I appreciate the task at hand and then what is before you to try to solve for the Glendale Water and Power, I still feel against the whole idea of relieving that pressure from the City Council and the General Fund, not to address the problems that are causing or have caused for so many years the postponement of so much critical infrastructure that was postponed. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say, while I appreciate the comments that Mr. Milano is making, this commission and GWP is limited in terms of that sort of decision-making. That's really a council decision in terms of where and what they do with transfers. We can only raise some of the impacts it is having on the utility, which I believe the commission is doing on its part, but that doesn't address the core issues, which are really the City Council's purview. But I appreciate the comments.
And if I may, President Armenian, I'd just like to comment. I appreciate your comments with regard to the pension, for example. That's not something within your jurisdiction. But I did want to comment briefly on the allegation with regard to the school district and the millions of dollars of liability. We have looked at this issue, and we do not include a capital facilities fee component in our rates. So that's not a liability.
Appreciate that clarification. Okay, next agenda item.
5, the agenda forecast.
Okay, included in your packet is an agenda forecast for the November 5th meeting. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 items on that agenda. Any comments on that? Do you foresee we'll be able to cover that in 2 hours?
Mr. President, let me first mention on utility bill design, hedging versus spot market purchasing and strategic plan. These are all 3 issues of which I am revisiting, and so I'm not sure at this time if I'm prepared. I'm sure I'm not prepared to bring forward with you updates, because I'm not going to keep perpetuating something that may very well change dramatically in the near future. On the issue of the hedging versus spot market, that'll be included in the overall evaluation of our energy trading component, the energy risk policy, and that presentation that we're bringing to you,
And
hopefully by the end of the year, maybe the December meeting. On the utility bill redesign, I've started over essentially on that to look at it again. I've had an initial meeting with staff. We've thrown some ideas out there. What I think I might bring back to you, and I pose this option to you as well. We might end up adding a commissioner to that committee that we have for direct commission input as we go through the process, and then when we get to the draft of what we want to present, bring that back to the commission. But at that time, I'll bring that proposal to you and let amongst yourselves decide who might want to represent the commission on that body. And on the strategic plan is another issue. That strategic plan may very well, by virtue of the fact that the structure of our operation has changed so dramatically, along with some of our goals and objectives, that we really need to revisit that. In fact, what I'm planning to do is to have a retreat type interaction with my staff to go back through the strategic plan and look where we need to overhaul it in particular areas to be consistent with where we are at today.
So will that happen before the November
No,
meeting?
I imagine, Mr. President, that'll probably be something after, if I can get it by the end of this calendar year, I'd be pretty happy, but it may be something more along the lines that we get to in January. That's a little bit more involved.
Can I make a request?
It's already in February. It's in a February strategic plan.
Oh, no, we had one scheduled, I'm sorry, Ms. Chen, for next month, an update on the scoreboard update we had.
Yeah, it's
So,
early.
yeah, in fact, we might be able to make that date. That February date might be the one. where
November or the February you're talking
The
about?
February date.
February,
November,
yeah,
we
'cause
wouldn't
there's
be
one
able
in
to
February.
make. The grid modernization or smart grid update, obviously we can do that. Maybe that next month, if you'd like, we can focus on cybersecurity, since that was a very...
I could make a quick request. I'm going to be out of state, and we'll miss that meeting.
Uh-huh.
I think staff and my colleagues know. So I really don't want to miss the water department update, and I'm wondering if we could accommodate my request to move that to another. That's scheduled for 5. I'd also really like to be here for Smart Grid update, but I see that's on every month, so I'll
If we
catch up.
if we take that out, we will
Yeah,
have one
we'll
agenda
revisit
item.
it. But if we are going to do have Ramon give us an overview of how he sees the water department side, I'd really like.
Is that what that is?
It's essentially picking up an update on various issues regarding water, but he was also going to use it as an opportunity to give you some of his observations, and hopefully we have our consultants' input by that time.
Well, I can certainly catch up by video, or but I just wanted to throw out that if you're looking for something to move, that would be my request.
Well, if we are eliminating for now, until further notice, bill redesign, hedging, and strategic plan update, then at that point, it's a very manageable meeting for the rest of it. If we accommodate Commissioner Dentler and move update for Water Department to the December 3rd meeting, then really just looking at plain crash restoration, which I believe that was may have been my earlier request.
Which we've delayed a few times.
Yeah, quarterly risk, and then smart grid update, really.
And let me ask Mr. Linz while he's here. Steve, is it possible you could move I noticed we have coal contract update in January. Is that something we could do next month?
No.
Oh, you want to do that too?
Can't, because there are members of the community who have been long planning to update.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
I don't think we should move that lightly. is my
I didn't
request.
realize. I thought that was a commission suggestion. Well then, that was my attempt to beef it up a little bit.
Again, I can catch up by the audio feed if you want to stick with Water Department. It's very important, so
Yeah, is there anything else that you foresee coming up between now and November 5th?
Likely not, Mr. Armenian. I don't.
Okay. Then I am going to suggest, because otherwise I think the agenda would be very light, and I'm afraid as we get some other things will come up in the next few months. So if it's okay, let's stick with the Water Department update, the plane crash, quarterly risk, and the smart grid.
Will do.
Time. If something else does come up between now and then, we'll entertain moving water department to December and substituting that in.
And I'll let you know right away if that
So we can,
does occur.
stay in touch on that. Is there anything else that, in terms of that things have been going to city council that we ought to be looking at either in post-analysis, post-game analysis, or future proposals that are going before council that we ought to hear before they go to council?
It may be, and I don't know if we will have it for next month, but there may be, we can give you the water bond update.
Okay.
But I'm not sure where we're going to be at next month. If in fact it comes together, I'll give you a phone call or send you an email.
Okay.
We'll add that to the agenda. If not, maybe we can get it in by December.
Okay.
I would like to mention, earlier I requested a kind of an update on any impacts that we see as a result of all those deferrals. I requested a quarterly update. So can we put one in maybe January 7th? You think
That's
that would
fine.
be a good time?
That's fine. That's
I
fine.
would second that.
And obviously, I think as we move through the budget process and see how the revenue enhancement program plays out, to come back to you with a specific budget early on with regards at least to the capital side of things, so we can see where we're at with that as well.
Oh, okay. And you're aiming for January? Is that what you're saying?
I'd probably do that after. We give you an update
After.
in January,
Okay.
and then the next, whether it was a March type of or even April update, which gets us closer, kind of puts us in the middle of the budget season, but we can talk to you about what we propose for the budget year and have a little bit better idea of where we are with any rate or rate increase or bond issuance for the electric side of the operation.
Okay. Any others? Okay. Motion to adjourn.
Move adjournment?
Second?
Those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.